camera on until I hand over to Prana. Okay.
Hello, we have a large group today, so we're just going to wait a few more moments before we get started. Hello, and welcome to today's Ask Me Anything webinar for recycled MMCF. Today's presentation will be recorded and sent out to all registered participants and also will be posted on the Hub. We will have a Q&A portion throughout the presentation. You can type your questions into the question box on the webinar doc. Any unanswered questions will be answered via the Hub afterward. Also, we'd like to share with you our antitrust statement. Textile Exchange convenes the textile community and values diversity of views, expertise, opinions, backgrounds, and experiences. It is expected that members of this community will collaborate by sharing ideas, information, and resources of publicly available information only and avoid discussion on price, strategic plans, or other private and sensitive information. With that, I now turn it over to Simone with Textile Exchange. Simone?
Thank you, Rose. I'm Simone Seisel. I'm based in Germany, work for Textile Exchange and responsible for man-made cellulosic fibers, or MMCF. Welcome to this webinar brought to you by the MMCF Roundtable. Many of you know I like to start our sessions with some news on forests or forestry and underline the need to protect them. But as it's Earth Day today, I wanted to share some numbers on the value of the so-called ecosystem services. But then I decided not to, but just really remind ourselves and this is a wonderful opportunity because we have more than 460 people registered for today's webinar. Remind ourselves to really celebrate Earth and Earth Day and showing our gratitude by also going outside today and really treating ourselves maybe with an outdoor break. For some of you, it might be really late already. So also when you've worked so hard on overcoming all the challenges that we work on in our day-to-day jobs. So if it's already too late to go outside, you maybe still want to read some news on forests. So check out the WWF report that came out on the status and drivers for deforestation in 24 global hotspots in the tropics and subtropics. So again, I couldn't resist to share some forest news with you. There are several main commodities that affect forests, and one of them are MMCFs. One aim of this growing fiber category to really tackle sustainability, and we had a great panel also last December on our MMCF Roundtable Summit, is to replace virgin forest-based feedstock for pulp with recycled or reclaimed material. So using the cellulose content of plants or plant-based fibers. I have an example for you. Many people have not really seen a pulp ready to make MMCF. So this is a pulp that used to be denim jeans, piece of pulp sheet. And today we will get to know the basics of RCS and GRS, and you have the opportunity to ask any questions related to MMCFs by typing them into your Q&A box. And so many questions have reached us, so I invited my expert colleagues to dedicate a full hour to this topic. And yeah, first let's have a look who we have in the room today.
Thanks, Simon. Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us today. I'm Prerna Pandey, Materials Program Coordinator here at Textile Exchange. I'd like to introduce you all to our presenters today, Trini Gartner, Standards Manager at Textile Exchange, and Amish Kasai, South Asia Manager at Textile Exchange. And this session's coordinator, Simon, who just spoke, and myself, Prerna Pandey. We hope you make the most of this informative session, and please do ask us anything, as the name of the session goes. Our team is happy to answer your questions. Thank you. Passing it over to you, Trini. Good luck.
Thank you, Prerna. Hi, everybody from Seattle, Washington, United States. So we have a full agenda today. We're going to start with a little bit more information about our standards and specifically the recycled standards. We're also going to share more information about how our chain of custody works, claims and labeling you can make, or claims you can make to the GRS. Close with some support materials, and then dive into the Q&A. First, I want to give you a very high-level overview of our integrity team. We are a team of 9, and integrity team is the standards and assurance team. And you see me on the left here. I'm the standards manager at Textile Exchange's standards team. And with me today is also Amish, our South Asia manager. Let's look at the goals and scope of the recycled standards. First, I want to start with a high-level overview over the standards that we have. This slide is slightly outdated. We just launched our alpaca standard yesterday as well, but Textile Exchange has 8 standards in total. And the recycled standards are 2 of them. We are going to get a little bit into more detail here on how they differ, what they cover, and the scope. So on a very high level, the intent of our recycled standards is to increase the use of recycled materials and products, and that is the baseline requirements for both of them. But then the GRS goes a little bit above and beyond by also wanting to reduce and eliminate harm caused by the production. So when we look at the scope, visuals are always very helpful. We started with principally when we drafted the standard with a aligned definition of what recycled actually means, and that goes for the GRS and the RCS. That the definition is based on ISO 14021. And it is a chain of custody model that starts with the verification of the recycled material at the recycling stage and then goes all the way to the final product. The GRS you can use as a standards tool. If you have a minimum percentage of 20%, you can use it as a tool to track recycled material through to your supply chain. However, if you want to label, you need a minimum of 50%. And we're going to go more into detail or pick that back up later when we talk about labeling. So the GRS is also including social and environmental requirements and also restricts hazardous chemicals in processing. Here they are again. So we have, in terms of criteria in the standard, we have an environmental management system that we require. There are chemical requirements in terms of how you have to manage your chemicals and the restricted substances list you have to adhere to. And then there are also social policies and social requirements that you will have to comply with. The recycled claims standard, short RCS, has the same chain of custody model as the GRS, as all our standards have. So it begins with, or we have the definition of recycled that also leans on ISO 14021. And it has the same chain of custody model beginning at the recycler stage and going all the way to the final garment. The percentages are a little bit different for the RCS. It can begin at 5% of recycled content all the way to 95% minimum or 100%. And you will see here that we have two logos for the RCS as well at the bottom left, which are for RCS 100 or RCS blended. And at that, I'm going to hand it over to Amish to take you through the recycled material verification. Amish?
Yeah, thank you, Trini. Thank you, Simon and Prerna, for welcoming. And hi, everyone. This is Amish Gosai, working as a South Asia manager. I will also walk you through the key information, so let's say key requirement of the Textile Exchange GRS and RCS standard. And it will also give you more in-depth information, how material can be qualified for GRS and RCS for recycling, and then what are the other additional requirement for a chain of custody. So Trini, the next one. What you see in this slide is exactly the same was Trini was explaining. We have chain of custody as well as requirement for recycling and the requirement for qualifying the material as a pre-consumer or a post-consumer waste, which is a reclaimed material. So what you see, everything starts with the recycler, not with the collector and concentrator. So if we take an example of man-made cellulose, meaning waste generated in a spinning industry such as yarn waste generated in the weaving, knitting industry, which is fabric waste coming from salvage or any quality rejection, or waste generated in a garment factory, cutting panels of fabric will be considered as a waste. But these sites are not required to be certified because they are just generating a waste. And after that, you will have one more trader or the same company are doing internal recycling. So these are the classic example of collector and concentrator. If I like to give another example for different industry, such as, let's say government body or municipality, who is collecting waste from household and then passing on to the concentrator to make suitable package for the next process. And then it will end up into recycling facility. So all material that is classified as a reclaimed material and that will go to recycler, and the recycler is a place where we start the first certification of GRS as well as RCS. Now recycler requires to be fulfill certain requirements. The very first requirement we verify or the standard requires is a documentation part of the material that is collected from different sources. Now, these sources can be a post-industrial waste, which is a pre-consumer waste, or post-industry waste, which is end of the life waste. And there has to be a documentation which provides a traceability that X person is collector, Y person is concentrator, and then the material is sold out to the recycler. We call this form is a material declaration form. And this is where all information regarding materials are collected. And then the material is accepted in the recycling unit. Recycling unit conducts a recycling process. So it can be done by mechanical recycling process, chemical recycling process, or biological recycling process. So there are three different recycling exists across the globe for a different raw material. Once fiber is recycled, then it is passed on to the subsequent textile supply chain. It can be passed on as a fiber, as a viscose for a man-made cellulose industry, or it can be also sold out as a filament, depending on the end use or capability of the recycler. And after that, it will go also to the fabric mill and garment mill, and then it is at the end, it will end up to the brand and retailer. So what we cover in a supply chain is starting from a recycler, it ends to the last business-to-business transaction. It can be a brand, or it can be a garment factory, depending on the supply chain involvement. What you see here is just basic understanding. I will also walk you through the chain of custody principle in a later slide. So before that, let's dive into what are the material that we classify as a reclaimed material, what are the recycled material, and what kind of reclaimed material exists in a system, and how we qualify them for acceptance in the standard. So here what you see is a basic definition of reclaimed material. The reclaimed material is a material which can be disposed let's say in environment, or normally goes for energy recovery. So instead of disposing them, or material goes for energy recovery, it can be collected and reclaimed to for a next process, and those material can be called as a reclaimed material. Remember, every production cycle, whether it's textile production or non-textile production, there is a two kind of material available in the around the world. First is a primary material, which normally goes grows from let's say on land, or it can be extracted from the land to make subsequent material, or secondary material, which is is a byproduct or a waste or a substitute, which can generate directly from primary raw material consumptions. There are certain examples for ease of understanding what can be called as a reclaimed material. What you see is on screen is used clothing, used plastic bottles, fabric cutting waste, and off specs product, which is quality rejection product that is produced during the production of the material. All these can qualify very easily under the reclaimed material. The next one, Trini. So in the reclaimed material, what we do at Textile Exchange, we classify each material into two categories. First one is a pre-consumer material. Industry also knows this material as a post-industrial material, because it is generated within an industry before consumer touch the final product. And this definition is not defined by Textile Exchange, but we are using the definition that is coming from ISO 14021 ISO standards, which talks about a type of recycling, which also talks about different kind of waste and energy recovery. Now here what you see is two important aspects. Material that is diverted from the waste stream during the manufacturing process. All this material can be qualified for pre-consumer material, but remember there is additional condition we do have in a pre-consumer material, which says that any reutilization of material such as rework, regrinding, scrap generation in the process, and that material, if that material has any recapability to reclaim within the same process, that material cannot qualify as a pre-consumer material. So there are some example here. What you see is a fabric cutting waste and a yarn waste that is generated in the fabric production, or even the yarn waste that is generated in a spinning industry can be qualified as a pre-consumer material. The next one, it's a post-consumer material. The post-consumer material, everyone knows. What you see here is, at the end of the product, when consumer buys the product, consumer use the product, and when they don't want to use anymore, this product can either end up in the landfill, or it can go for energy recovery, or sometimes people do reuse it, certain garments, if they are in the good conditions. So we qualify such material as a post-consumer because consumer has touched the product, the first life cycle of the product has ended according to the customer, and then it will come into the recycling facility, and that qualifies as a post-consumer material. There are some example: used garments, which is clothing, and it can be used plastic bottles and so on. The next one, what you see is, the recycling. You have seen what are the reclaimed materials. There are two classification, and once these two materials are accepted in the recycling facility, then it will go for recycling. And after recycling, what you get is a secondary material, which is classified as a recycled material. So recycling can be happening in a different stage, as I explained, or different type of recycling, such as mechanical, chemical, or biological. And after that, what you get as a new material that is originated from a previous life. So there are some example of recycled materials: a threaded fiber from used cloth, plastic chips coming from plastic bottle, threaded fiber coming from a cutting waste. The next one is a chain of custody. So what you have seen, the material is in a supply chain, the first point of entry, where the standard starts. And once it is accepted, then the chain of custody starts in a system. So here, let me just explain you how industry works, and the reality versus a dream. Everyone wants to see everything. What you see on your left-hand side, there is always a dream of customer or even consumer, or let's say brand or retailer, or even a supply chain partner. They want to know from where the raw material is coming, whether this raw material is coming from, let's say, from India, it's coming from China, it is coming from a certain location, or let's say the forestry is coming from India, or from somewhere in Sweden. But it's only possible if you have right chain of custody, because chain of custody only drives a real passage for a transparency and a traceability. But what you see on your Right hand side, the textile industry is too complex. There are a number of variables. If we take very basic example, that you have raw material, then you have fiber or a filament, then you might will have a trader, then you will have yarn and fabric and garment, and then brand and retailer. But in actual reality, still there are a lot of subcontractor exists in a supply chain. There are a lot of hands who touch the products for a lot of ornamentation, which is like embroidery and so on. So in reality, if you don't have a chain of custody, you cannot give any guarantee that garment that is in your hand or product that is in your hand is coming from dedicated one source, because there are permutation and combination exists, and supplier can buy certified or non-certified material anywhere from any supply that exists around the globe. So what we do at Textile Exchange, that is on the next slide, what we have at the chain of custody, I will go in deeper, but before that, I like to give you audience deeper dive. What are the chain of custody model exist across the globe, and who defines this chain of custody model? So ISO 22025 defines a chain of custody models, and this chain of custody models at the moment exists in a 5 different way. The first one is identity preserve model. The second one is a segregation model. A third one is a control blending model. Fourth one is a mass balance model. And fifth one is a book and claim model. Every model has its own advantage and disadvantage. And also it has a capability for providing a traceability, transparency, and also certain claims. So identity preserve model, which is something can be offered by Textile Exchange, but due to the complexity of textile supply chain, nobody's using it. However, the one that you see in the dark, let's say in the orange box segregation model and control blending model, which is offered by Textile Exchange Standard, which is Textile Exchange CCS standard, which is chain of custody standard. It is also applicable to GRS and RCS. The difference between the segregation model and control blending model is only thing about non-certified versus certified material composition. So what you see on a segregation model, you can only mix certified material, and that requires at least a 95% certified material. It can go up to 100%. So if we take example of RCS, where we do have a two label, RCS 100 and RCS blended, RCS 100 qualifies for a segregation model. We do have one more model where we call a control blending model, where we allow blending of same category of material or even the different category of material, and minimum content required in a final product or any subsequent products is minimum 5%. So RCS 100 is for segregation model, RCS blended is for a control blending model example. We don't offer at the moment mass balance and book and claim for any of Textile Exchange standard right now. However, we have just recently done a pilot with the 3 organizations for mass balance, because we have realized from the certain industry practice that certain industry cannot work on segregation model or a control blending model because of the nature of the process. At the same time, the controlling input versus output is too difficult. And those examples are, if site is doing continuous production and not batch production, that means segregation and control blending model is a little bit difficult to handle. And if the site is doing chemical recycling, then also a segregation model and control blending model is quite difficult to achieve. So because of that, we have done 3 pilots with the 3 sites. Soon we are going to publish a result out of it, and we are also going to present same to content claim standard working group. And after proper approval, it might be possible that there are certain supply chain actors who is doing continuous chemical production or continuous chemical production plus recycling via chemical method. They can use this system, but it will come with different claim policies. The next one will give you the more information about what we do as a key principle of chain of custody. So I have explained you that we use segregation model and control blending model. It has a key 3 principle. The first one, every product from end to end, starting from the waste that is collected, then recycle it, then yarn and so on. Every product must need to identify in the production floor clearly, which says this product is certified or reclaimed material or recycled product. At the same time, in a supply chain, every product must need to keep a segregate model where the certified products cannot be keep in next to, or let's say in conjunction, where the contamination can be easily possible. So segregation is quite important principle as a second principle. under chain of custody that we've asked site to follow, which will make sure that both materials are not mix or entangle with each other. The third point is volume reconciliation. This is where input versus output are measured, and subtraction of the production losses are calculated and deducted from input quantity. So everyone knows, if you take 1 kg as an input, output can be 1 kg, but cannot be more than 1 kg because there is always a production lot. But there are certain cases where the weight is increased because of addition of the new non-certified material. So with these 3 key principles followed in the supply chain, we make sure that final product that is received by the consumer or any intermediate business-to-business transaction buyers are actually receiving a certified component and also certified content in a supply chain. The next slide will give you the more in detail information about whether it is only applicable to certain supplier or it's applicable to everyone. So the current principle that we have in supply chain, it starts with the recycler and it ends till final business to business transaction. So if you are a brand or a retailer who is selling to consumer, that means then only you are not required to certify. Otherwise, everyone has to require certified. Everyone has to follow the key 3 principle, which is identification, segregation, and volume reconciliation. That is the basic requirement of chain of custody. If we talk about GRS, then all sites must need to comply additional 3 requirements, which is a chemical requirement, social requirement, and environment requirement. So that's all about chain of custody. And over back to you, Trini. So we'll guide you on claim and labeling.
Thank you, Amish. Let's look at claims and labeling. So on the screen, you now see the 3 different logos that we have available if you want to label to one of our recycled standards. So for GRS, I talked a little bit about the 20% versus 50%, and it is important that if you want to label to the GRS on a final product, you have to have a minimum percentage content of 50%. However, the 20%, we sometimes hear interest from supply chain partners who want to use the GRS as a tool to track recycled material. However, they may not want to label. And you can certify to the GRS without wanting to make claims at a minimum percentage of 20%. In the GRS, blending is allowed with other materials that are not the same type. And for the RCS, when we look here, so we have the RCS blended logo and we have the RCS 100 logo. The RCS you can use when your product has a minimum of 5% of recycled material, or that is for the blended one, sorry. So the blended one, you have to have a minimum percentage of 5%, whereas for the RCS 100, you have to have a minimum percentage content of 95%. The difference between the two is, so for RCS 100, you are not allowed to blend it with other like materials, whereas for the RCS blended, you are allowed to label. In terms of making claims, the very important rule here is that we require certification up to the seller in the final business-to-business transaction. And as you can see in the graphic here, that can be the brand or that can be the garment manufacturer. It depends on the supply chain. However, retailers and consumers will always be out of scope of certification. So the seller in the final business-to-business transaction is the #1 rule that you will have to look at, whereas we are looking to change that requirement in our content claim standard revision right now to require certification up to the brand. And finally, I want to give you some more updates on what is happening in our worlds and which standards are under development. So we are at the tail end of a CCS revision. CCS stands for Content Claim Standard, which we embarked on early last year. Our revisions are approximately 18 months long. And we are looking at a final release date or time sometime around June of this year for the Content Claim Standard. And as you've seen at the beginning, the Content Claim Standard is our foundation of chain of custody for all of our existing standards. More importantly for everyone on the call today is to note that we just began the revision of our recycled standards on April 1st. And we put out an open feedback period, which is how we usually start our revisions. So right now, and I have another slide and a link for that as well, and I encourage you all to participate in this revision, is right now we're looking for feedback on anything, everything that is not working on the current version of the GRS and the RCS. And then we undergo a stakeholder process, a drafting process for the next 18 months until Q3 2022 to bring out the new version of the standard. And we always say we create our standards for the industry by the industry. So this is a multi-stakeholder process where we invite you to draft the new version alongside us here in standards. There are 3 main points, principally how you can participate. I highly encourage to visit our revision website, which will always have the most up-to-date information on next steps, where we are within the timeline process. Hyperlinked here is the open feedback period that you can see on screen. So the revision page at the end will always have an opportunity to weigh in. And during the open feedback period, we also ask if people are interested to participate in the International Working Group, which is our industry stakeholder group that we convene for standards revisions to assist us in drafting a really, really strong standard. And then lastly, we advertised this webinar in our communications from Textile Exchange, but it is important, and I encourage you to sign up to receive communications from us so that we can make sure that you're in the loop on next steps as well. Lastly, I think Simone already answered, we had a question on this, whether or not slides and materials will be shared, and they will be. What you will receive is also this slide with direct links to the most important documents. And I'm just going to run through them real quick. So you have the standards themselves on the first slot, GRS and RCS. Then we also have a quick guide that we make available. It's like a page or 2, which can be useful depending on where you are in the supply chain. We see partners sharing that with their supply chain saying, hey, here's what we want to do. This is what the standards are about. So it's just a very high level quick guide. Then we also have local use and claims guides, as well as a claims policy. And I'd encourage folks that are looking into GRS, RCS certification new, wondering what claims they can make, to only look at the claims policy. So the claims policy right now, we released in November 2020, and it will be the only applicable document as of November 1st come this year. And it will replace all existing local use and claims guides. So our claims policy really looks at any claim you can make for all of our standards, and it's just one document versus the multiple local use and claims guides we're currently having and will be phasing out. And then there's also a GRS RCS implementation manual. 2 further documents that are really, really helpful if you're just starting out are our toolkits. And we have 2 of those, the brand and retailer certification toolkit, as well as the supplier toolkit. And then we often also receive the question, well, who's already certified? We have a list, or who can I liaise with? We have a list of GRS RCS certified companies, which is also hyperlinked here, that you can look at, maybe look at if your supply chain partners are already certified, or you're looking for new business partners, so it can be used in multiple ways. And the last here of many other resources guides you to our standards website, where we update very frequently with a lot of new information. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to you, Simone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was quite a bit to digest, but let's see, we have many, many questions. I will just throw the first 3 at you, and please, Trini and Amish, up to you to decide really who is best suited to answer them. And so let's kick this question Q&A off. There's several questions about the recycled material. So one question was, if it starts at the recycler, how can you identify what is pre and post consumer or pre or post industrial? And then also asking, wouldn't it be more accurate to start at the source of the waste, or why is the standard not starting at the source of the waste? And then also a question on the, quickly again on the ISO number that serves as a base to define the reclaimed material. So maybe that also matches the first question about pre and post consumer identification.
Do you want to take that one, Amish?
Yeah, it's too many questions. I'm going to reply one by one. So standard that we refer as a reclaimed material, which is pre-consumer or post-consumer, that is 14,021, which gives you more in-depth information about what is a recycling, what is a reclaimed material, what is a waste, what is energy recovery, all the definition you can find in that standard document. However, if you don't want to buy a standard and if you want to refer what is definitions are saying, it's available in the GRS document and RCS document. So you can see, why we are qualifying certain material as a pre and post consumer. Now, both definition gives very clear explanation which kind of waste is qualified as a pre or post consumer. What you need to see, let's say, if you're not from industry, yes, of course, it's quite difficult for a non-background person to say whether it is pre-consumer and post-consumer unless and until that person sees the origin of the waste. If it is origin before or let's say within a process of any textile or non-textile, that means it's a pre-consumer waste, and any waste that is generated after making a final product which reach out to the consumer and consumer completes their first use, and those products will be called as a post-consumer waste. Anything else that I miss, Simone?
I think that covered the qualification of the waste material.
Qualification of the waste material. Yeah, that's clear. And one thing that I remember, why it's not starting with collector and concentrator. So let me just give you two examples. Let's take a first example as a post-consumer. Post-consumer, the waste that is generated by the consumer. So we cannot go and certify each consumer that you will generate a waste. We are going to collect back from you. So it starts with the collecting entity. There could be a number of entities. It can be a private organization. It can be a trader. It can be a government organization such as municipality who collects the waste from a consumer and then pass it on to the concentrator and then recycler. So when standard started back in 2008, it started with the recycling because we want to adopt more recycling for industry and change the world for using a primary material to the secondary material. However, we have seen that people are looking or asking more and more information about traceability of the waste origin. So that's about the post-consumer. So it's quite difficult to certify, let's say, consumer, but yes, it is possible to track out collector and concentrator. And that's we do right now with the material declaration form. Same applies for a pre-consumer material because pre-consumer materials are generated within the industry. And these industries, either they are certified or non-certified to our standard. If they are certified to our standard, we do have 100% traceability internally with, again, the same material declaration form. But if it is non-certified entity which handles by the third party or can be a number of organizations who is collecting a waste, processing a waste, and then supplying to recycler, it is difficult to trace that is material is actually generated by XYZ because it's a small quantity concentrated and converted into the big quantity for ease of transportation. However, as Trini mentioned, we just started a GRS and RCS revision. If you still feel very strongly that this has to be part of the certification, please do provide this feedback. We will welcome your feedback. We will discuss with international working group of GRS and RCS, and let's see how the discussion goes and can we find a solution around those certification.
Thank you.
Simone, we had one question on, can you tell me what exactly happens on audit day that I quickly wanted to jump in, how that works, and also clarify that Textile Exchange, excuse me, is the standard setter, and we work with authorized certification bodies to audit against our standards. So if you're interested in certification to the standards, you would contact one of our authorized CBs, fill out an application, lay out your supply chain, and then you would work with that CB's certification body to get the audit rolling. And really the timeline, how long it takes to get certified and what exactly happens is dependent on how well prepared you are for the audit. So you will be audited against the criteria in the GRS, in the standard, or the RCS. But then the time it takes is really between you and the certification body to discuss in advance how long that will take.
Thanks, Trini. I think there was another question quite related, and I guess you've covered most of it, but I'll just quickly read it out. We had one of the questions saying, can you please explain the difference between B2B and B2C scenarios and who needs audit and who doesn't?
Yes, so this ties back to the slide that I had shown about who within the supply chain needs to be certified. And the hard and fast rule is the seller in the final business-to-business transaction will need to be certified. So B2B, if you're selling on to another entity and there's a financial transaction between you and your next buyer, you yourself will have to be certified. If you are exclusively selling only direct to consumer, B2C, then you will not have to become certified. In that case, the last entity that will require certification is your direct supplier. And the reason why, or not the reason, but where this matters is sometimes a brand, for example, if you're a brand, I don't know who this question came from. So if you're a brand and you sell on to a retailer, you yourself will have to be certified. If you, because there's another financial transaction between you and the retailer. If, however, you are not selling through retailers only on your website, only direct to consumers, then you as a brand will not have to be certified, but your direct supplier would be the last entity in the last business-to-business transaction. And that is one area to discuss with your certification body. So that's also part of the application, because they will want to know whether or not you are in scope, out of scope, and who actually needs to undergo an audit and who does not.
And Trini, we have several questions on the certification bodies. There is a list of in what countries, what certification bodies can be contacted, right?
Correct, yes. And I can add that to the slide before we send it out. Our list of authorized certification bodies, you can filter that list by standard, by geographic region. And we always advise some work on a global level to start with the certification body that is closest to you in geography. Specifically right now, in times of a global pandemic, travel is still restricted. So there are, it's advised to start with somebody that's closest to you in geographic location.
Great. So I will go also next with a combination of two questions about the percentage of material by product weight. One was generic on the product weight, like having for example, a product that has steel, aluminum, and textile fabric, and how do we handle the non-fabric components, and what if the textile weight is just 50% of the total product weight, for example?
Yeah, so let me just answer that part. So currently we do provide both provision. So as a brand, let's say as a consumer or a buyer, they have both options. Either they can claim a full product weight and then calculate a percentage, which called a product claim, or we do have another thing, which is we call a component claim. So you can also claim only a component and say this component is made out of GRS or RCS. So both provisions are available. And why we do provide this provision, because sometimes it's quite complex that all the component within one product cannot be certified, and the weight of one component is only made from a recycled source, and the weight is sometimes is too low to qualify under GRS. Because remember, we need minimum 20% to qualify as a GRS, minimum 5% to qualify as the RCS, and minimum 50% to qualify as a GRS logo on a product. And because of that, we have both provision, and its percentage are always calculated, which options are selected by manufacturer or buyer or a seller.
Okay, so many options there. And as there is RCS 100, there is also the RCS blend, or the RCS that is lower than 100, obviously.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll take another question. It's a scenario-based question from a brand who asks, I'm a brand in EU. I buy product which uses GRS fabric. How do I use a hand tag for the products that is manufactured in China and sold in China? And I think a similar question, maybe Amishi covered it, but I'll just read it out. If the customer is asking for transparency of the product, is it possible for CB to provide all the TCs starting from A to Z?
Yeah, so for traceability, yes, as a buyer of the final product, you can request the transaction certificate of your input material. So if you're a buyer of fabric, you can request a transaction certificate of a yarn. However, from yarn to fiber and fiber to collector, this information needs a consent from the subsequent supply chain partner, because remember, you don't buy fiber or you don't buy yarn. It's your supplier, fabric supplier, who is buying that product. So everything depends on a consent basis, but as a buyer, you will see one up and one down traceability from the transaction certificate.
Then allow me
And-
to clarify also in terms of the chain of custody. So because the inquirer said they're a brand buying fabric. So in order to be able to label, the full chain of custody will need to be certified. So after the fabric, all the steps up to the brand will also have to be certified. So your manufacturer of the product will also have to be certified in order for you to be able to label. So if you are just sourcing GRS fabric or GRS yarn, but then nothing in between the yarn and yourself is certified, that would constitute a broken chain of custody. So that is really important that you have full chain of custody certification if you want to label.
Thank you. And I think Amish, I have to go back to you with a brief clarification on the GRS. Again, could you explain what claims can be made when a product is 20% recycled material, but below 50%, in GRS?
Okay, so to have a transaction certificate and a scope certificate for a product as a GRS, you need a minimum 20%. But let's say you want to label the product as a GRS. That means that product must need a minimum 50% to qualify as an on-product label claim. So that's the difference between the 20% and 50%.
So this goes back to what I mentioned before. Some companies or some entities may want to use the GRS as a tool just to track recycled material, but they may not want to label the final product or make a claim to the GRS. So a company can certify, or an entity can certify to the GRS if they have a minimum of 20%. However, between 20 and 50, they cannot label or make any claims to the GRS. I don't know if that helps to make it a little clear.
Thank you. Then maybe I have another question going back to the MMCF specific. Does Textile Exchange GRS certified material require the FSC or PEFC chain of custody certification as well? So any specific requirements on the feedstock?
Not at the moment. GRS and RCS only verifies chain of custody from end to end, and the input has to be reclaimed material, which can be pre-consumer or post-consumer. Yeah, so it's two different things. FSC certified fabric has to be produced first and then reuse it for recycling, and that's a different cycle and different activity. Yeah, so right now it's not required. It's only pre-consumer and post-consumer.
Thank you. And also there was one question about, again, scope certificate versus transaction certificate. So when, like, very briefly, why is a scope certificate not enough when buying a material?
So in terms, I can take that one. So a scope certificate certifies the entity on the ground, whereas a transaction certificate travels with the product through the supply chain. So you always will want to look at both. A scope certificate tells you that an entity or a supplier you're buying from is eligible to sell on GRS terms, whereas a transaction certificate tells you exactly the amount of recycled content in the product you are buying from that seller. So our system is based on scope certificates and transaction certificates, and you will always want to look at both, depending on where you are in the supply chain, that is.
Yeah. So just adding, but chain of custody has a two component. If you get a chance to read ISO 22095 chain of custody model, that it gives more information about how chain of custody works to end. But to track the material, you need a document which says, this is a buyer, this is a seller, XYZ is a last processor verified by X company, and that can be only done through the transaction certificate, and that falls under traceability model. So traceability and a chain of custody model combines together provides a full chain of custody. Only one thing cannot give you possibility or giving you any idea about whether this material is actually recycled or any other certified component. Remember, certified site or even non-certified sites, given point of time, they are processing n number of material. Or maybe let's take example of garment. They have organic, let's say the cotton garment, viscose garment, polyester garment. How you will know whether that garment is made of cotton or polyester? Only a taste report. Otherwise, it's not possible. And for certified material, we run our transparency, traceability, chain of custody through the two systems. One is a scope certificate, annual license, and one is a transaction certificate, which runs through the product to end to end.
Thank you. Again, there's many questions really about the chemical components of, for example, a T-shirt that was dyed and is reclaimed into post-consumer material. Question says, can companies use GRS post-consumer materials in alignment with their RSL and MRSLs? Like, what if a T-shirt was originally produced with restricted chemicals, but was then recycled and not processed with these chemicals?
Yeah, so there are two different, I can see a question. Mainly first one is, GRS has a chemical requirement where we target three key components. The first one is every product that is made under GRS must need to comply the REACH requirement. The second one is Textile Exchange has their own hazardous chemical list, which we call H code or risk phrases that industry knows. Those chemicals are not allowed to be used in a, let's say, GRS product. And third one is about a ZDHC MRSL. So if the product is textile or let's say footwear or foam or leather, then of course all the chemical used in GRS product must need to comply ZDHC MRSL. So that means with these three requirements, we definitely do address the chemical component, and the product won't have such chemical use while manufacturing a GRS product. However, if it is RCS, then it is not applicable. That's one answer. The second thing, the waste that is going to be used, such as pre-consumer or post-consumer waste, it can be made with such restriction or it can be made without such restriction. And it is impossible to track, or it is impossible to test each and individual garment before recycling because it's too much cost for testing. You can imagine if you're reselling 1,000 garments, who is going to taste 1,000 garments? And even if somebody is willing to, who is going to cover the cost of tasting of such a big volume? And because of that, the current GRS only talks about the processing according to chemical requirement listed by GRS. It is not addressing anything about what is coming in under with the post-consumer or pre-consumer waste. It might have a non-restricted RSL or MRSL component, or it might have a restricted component. What we have seen, there are certain brands, they started their own internal program where they use their own waste generated for the first order, and they will put it back into recycling facility nominated by them. And then that's how they control full MRSL and RSL, even for input feedstock.
Thanks, Amish. I'll just be a bit brave and try to direct the conversation from technical questions to more generic one, which I thought is interesting. And the question goes like, what is the current market trend of using preferred MMCF? For example, what percentage of clothing materials use preferred MMCF, and are they well-known brands promoting the use of preferred MMCF?
So Simon, do you want to take this one, volume? Otherwise, I can just give you brief info that we do at the moment.
I let you go ahead, Amish.
Okay. Okay. So volume is, quite tricky at the moment. We are working on a system where we track the movement of the each goods, and that is managed by the third-party certification bodies. We are developing a system where all the records are kept at a centralized location, and once it is available at centralized location, that means then we can compare the virgin production of MMCF over a recycled production of MMCF, and then we can see a market share. However, there are a number of brands, big, small, or medium, coming from Europe, even Indian brands or even Chinese brand, and also coming from US. All of them have the sustainable source raw material requirement. They have targets to meet, and these targets are ambitious target, and we have definitely know that over a period of time, people don't want to replace man-made cellulose, but people definitely want alternative solution of virgin man-made cellulose, such as cellulose made out of recycled sources or cellulose made out of FSC or PFC certified forestry. So volumes are increasing day by day. Yeah, but at the moment we don't have an exact number.
And from a share within the pulp used for MMCFs, I can just add that suppliers for commercially available volumes, they're offering usually around 20 to 33% recycled content within their pulp feedstock. But then there is innovators that also have pilots or first offerings of 100% recycled cellulose on pulp stage. But then the pulp might again be mixed with virgin pulp. So you can take 100% reclaimed material pulp and then mix it again with virgin pulp, of course. A brief question on the scope. How about trims and accessories? Is there any requirements for GRS OCS?
Right now, we do offer both option. When I say option means, trims and accessories are not required to be certified under GRS and RCS or any of Textile Exchange Standards. But in the version 3, we are coming up with a different requirement on altogether, but it's still 2 years to go. So what I will focus right now is, if you want to certify full product, it is possible to certify a product without certifying trims and accessories. It's not required to get certified. However, we have seen there are brands who started, certifying each and every component of the product, including the trims, even just tiny such as buttons and stitching thread. So not only to GRS, but in combination of the 2 standard or 3 standards, such as, let's say, organic product with recycled buttons or a zipper, or you will have GRS product within certain organic stitching threads instead of synthetic threads. So it is possible, but it is not mandatory at the moment.
Then maybe we have time for 2 more questions. Prana, did you, anyone? But I can also go ahead.
Yeah.
So will Textile Exchange provide a list of certified suppliers of recycled MMCF, and where and how and when can it be found?
So I mentioned during earlier the presentation a list of certified companies, which is also hyperlinked on that slide. So if you are interested in who is certified to the GRS RCS at the moment, that side of our website would be the place to go. Just a heads up, this site is approximately updated every 6 weeks based on reports we receive from our certification bodies. So it is wise to check back frequently to see if one of your suppliers or you've heard something will be listed there, if not yet listed.
Yeah, and there will also be a lot of updates in our preferred fiber and materials market report that comes out in summer. So again, there we will try and cover as much as possible on the rMMCF front. There is questions also on the labeling side, but also on how to work with how to kind of increase integrity and how to work with certification bodies. These questions we will post on the hub with some answers and also some very technical questions that I would like to address to our leading suppliers, part of the MMCF hub, where they are best suited really to answer these questions that go into offerings or into quality, for example. There will be some on the hub. So this said, let me conclude and thank you so much. And thank you, Amish and Trini. Also great learning for me. And for those who are not part of our MMCF Roundtable Hub community, it's free, it's open to anyone. This is the place to stay informed and to also get engaged and ask also the wide network. And you can really ask any question and start discussion posts on the hub. And also we will, of course, share all the details on today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
to
you,
our
everyone.
speakers. And thank you for participating in today's webinar. As a friendly reminder, as Simone stated, all unanswered questions will be answered via the hub, and an email will be sent to all registered participants with a link to today's presentation. That concludes our webinar. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.